Ambassador Elayne Whyte Gómez from the Ambassador of Costa Rica and the President of the United Nations Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons leading towards their total elimination. As you know, they've been holding talks since Monday. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for your presence here. I want to share with you that the conference is unfolding, is developing in a very positive and constructive atmosphere. The number of states that are participating, they have been participating in the conversations, is more than 115. For the opening session, we were honored to receive a message by Pope Francis. And also we received a video message from the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. We were very and deeply touched to hear the testimony of a survivor of the bombings in Hiroshima. "52 states have participated in the high-level segment, including on behalf, and I think this is something very important that I would like to highlight, on behalf of several of the major regions and sub-regions represented in the conference. That means there have been regional statements by the African group, the Arab states, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean states, the Caribbean Community, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. We are working with more than 220 representatives from civil society. They are not only registered, they're contributing in a very active manner. Their contributions have deeply enriched the conversations, but also states have recognized their pivotal role in launching these negotiations. I have also received a petition in support of the process by a group of 3,000 leading scientists, including more than 24 Nobel laureates. I have to tell you, and this is something that is very important for the conference and for the mood of the delegates, that we have heard several testimonies of survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and of nuclear testings throughout the world, and that has reminded all delegates of the catastrophic humanitarian impact of any use of nuclear weapons. And therefore, it has actually reaffirmed the commitment of all delegations to work towards a very positive result. I would like to remind that the resolution that created this mandate has requested delegations to work to make our best efforts to conclude as soon as possible the legally binding instrument. We would have to say that the mandate of the conference to conclude a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, therefore, continues to enjoy a very large support of the great majority of the states, but also of the world's peoples. I would say also that after the high-level segment this week, we managed to address all procedural issues and began discussing substantive elements already in the second day of the conference. I think this is a great achievement that speaks of the fact that all delegations have a true conviction of the overall objective that we are all looking for, which is the achievement of a world free of nuclear weapons. We have had robust and constructive exchanges so far on the prospective legally binding instrument, including on its principles and objectives, preamble, and core provisions. There is a number of common elements and aspirations that have already emerged from this process. For instance, the pursuit of this initiative has been largely, overwhelmingly recognized to have been compelled by the deep concerns regarding the humanitarian consequences that will result from any use of nuclear weapons, and also from a widely shared view that the pace of global nuclear disarmament has been very slow, and the existing architecture of global disarmament has undergone a stalemate for decades. The participating states share the aspiration to conclude the instrument that contributes to the longer-term process of achieving and maintaining a world free of nuclear weapons. But they have also expressed a clear intent to establish a categorical prohibition on nuclear weapons as fundamentally incompatible with international law, and especially with international humanitarian law. There is a strong sense, though, that this treaty should reinforce and strengthen the existing legal instruments, starting with the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and also the various treaties establishing nuclear weapon-free zones, and also mentioning of the safeguards regime maintained by the International Atomic Energy Agency. States have underscored the non-discriminatory nature of the treaty and have as well emphasized a sense of long-term vision for the architecture of the treaty. It is very important to mention that this week's works have been organized in such a way that the states have an opportunity to share their visions, their expectations about the scope of the treaty and its content. We will reconvene in June to start the negotiations of a text on the basis of a draft that the chair will produce after having listened to all the discussions that are taking place this week. Also, let me share with you that in terms of the contributions that we have been receiving so far, there are many contributions regarding the core prohibitions, legal provisions and norms that could eventually be included in the legally binding instrument once the negotiations conclude. I would like to mention some elements as examples of the discussions that we are having so far. For instance, elements discussed have included prohibitions against the acquisition, possessing, stockpiling, production, manufacture, development, testing, use, or threat of use of nuclear weapons. Participants have also discussed issues related to the stationing or deployment of nuclear weapons on their territory, the transit of nuclear weapons through national territory or airspace, and the entry of vessels and aircraft at ports and airfields, as well as any assistance provided to third parties in acts prohibited by the instrument. There has also been interest in including positive obligations, which could recognize an expression of the rights of the victims and survivors of the use and testing of nuclear weapons, and also to the possibility of creating an obligation to provide assistance in the event of a nuclear attack and to remediate the environmental harm. States have also proposed the inclusion of pertinent compliance clauses. I would like to share with you that so far a constructive spirit and common sense of purpose has prevailed in the deliberations, and as President, I feel very much satisfied with the progress achieved so far, and it makes me be very hopeful and optimistic that the completion of an effective and legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons by July 7th is an achievable goal. I look forward to working with all the delegations, as I have been doing so since I was elected president of this conference. And also the door remains open for all states' participation in the conference. As I said, tomorrow we will continue with the discussion of the institutional arrangements, and I will also announce the way forward for the intersessional period and the indicative and the proposed way forward also for the first part of the June session, which, as I said, starts on 15 July and will extend until 7th of July. And this is when hopefully we can adopt a text. I thank you very much, and I would like to highlight the very, very important commitment of all delegations that are present in the room. More than 115 states are present and committed to this, to achieving the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. I thank you, and I will be ready to take your questions.
Okay, thanks very much. If you can identify yourself as you speak. Yes.
Ambassador, thank you. Evelyn Leopold, I welcome you on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association. Did you say 115 or 150 participants?
It's 115.
115.
115.
Okay, fine. And that's June 15th to July what? Your next session?
July 7th.
July 7th. Okay. Now a question. As you know, North Korea and its increasing armament has been given as a reason not to join this because allegedly it's a very dangerous country. If that is true and one needs to arm nuclear, how many bombs would one need to protect themselves from North Korea?
The new and the aspiration is to develop new thinking and new security thinking for the 21st century and beyond. That does not depart from fear and the threat of use of nuclear weapons and force, but that leads to the more institutional, rules-based international order. What we are trying to achieve is precisely the opposite objective, which is to build world security without the existence of nuclear weapons. And the aspiration is that all countries can join in this prohibition so that we can start the process of actual disarmament and to be able to destruct in the future, to be able to deal with the elimination of the existing arsenals. This is something the treaty is thought as a first step in this direction.
Thank you. My name is Masood Haider. I represent the Dawn newspaper of Pakistan. Madam Ambassador, can you please tell us how hopeful are you that you will ever achieve this, any sort of agreement for the text and the draft, given the fact that there are countries which are totally opposed to it, including the United States, and there are countries like India, Pakistan, and Israel, which are also nuclear weapon states, but do not want to, say that they are. So there is no unanimity in the international community. So what gives you hope that you will be able to achieve your objective now? Can you tell us about that? I have another follow-up question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. The countries that are deeply committed to work in this legally binding instrument are actually thinking in the long term. We want to achieve this legally binding norm, this legally binding instrument in the short term, but thinking in the long term and with the objective in mind that we will be able to breach also a communication with and an invitation for the nuclear weapon states to join in the future to this regime. So this is a process that is establishing a norm for the future. This does not mean that we have to shy away from the challenge. We are committed with providing filling the legal gap, and from there on to be able to move towards the following steps, and to be able to have the nuclear weapon states also join this regime for for the good of humankind.
So Madam Ambassador, is there a timeline that you have? Because this can go on forever. Do you have a timeline that you visualize that in my lifetime maybe it can be achieved? Do you have that timeline at all, that these countries, dissenting countries, will come in and join the Conference of Disarmament?
I'll tell you that we have in the mandate of this process, we have a sense of urgency, and we have an encouragement by the General Assembly to conclude this instrument as soon as possible. Of course, this is our responsibility, the responsibility of those of us who are in the room, and we hope that the nuclear weapon states will also be able to hear the cry of the international community in order to move towards a new thinking and new security paradigms that will be based on a different perspective of the use of force and the elimination of nuclear weapons.
Sure.
Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. Two things. First of all, you said there were 115 participants, but did I hear you correctly to say there were about 52 more active members of this group in the actual drafting process? And secondly, your objective, you said, is to achieve a legally binding treaty or convention, but that would be, you would concede, only amongst those who sign on to it and have it ratified. So while you hope to draw in those states that already have nuclear weapons, are you contending that the treaty itself creates legally binding international norms to which they would be subject? And with North Korea, they've already rejected every effort of the international community through the Security Council, et cetera. They've withdrawn from the non-proliferation treaty. So what makes you think they would be amenable at any point in time with the current leadership to suddenly accede to the international norms, legal framework that you're trying to create?
Yes, 115 countries have been attending and participating in the conference. The first part of the session was devoted for a high-level segment, so that countries could, at the high political level, state their aspirations and their commitments. And this is where 52 countries registered for the high-level segment to deliver a presentation. After that, we moved to the discussion of the substantive issues, and there we have not only heard from all the countries, but also from the civil society and academia. So it has been a very inclusive process. I would like to mention that in the case of weapons of mass destruction, let us remember that nuclear weapons are the only ones that have not been prohibited in international law. And in the case of the other weapons of mass destruction, prohibition has preceded the process for their elimination. And this treaty is following the same approach and the same logic. With the prohibition in place and with the expansion of the normative basis that regulate nuclear weapons, we should create the political, the normative, the ethical, and also the awareness of the international community, both the civil society, private sector, as well as the public sector, to move towards a more concrete steps into programs of disarmament. Therefore, let us remember that we are trying at this moment to also fill a legal gap in international law. And this is the main commitment and the first task that we need to achieve. But at this moment, we strongly believe that we need this phase in order to move to the other phases of elimination.
Of the 115 who initially participated, moving forward to the June session of countries that are actually going to be involved in the negotiations of the outcome convention or treaty, how many do you envision as of now will actually roll up their sleeves and participate in the negotiation? Is it that smaller group of 52, or do you have any other number, a subset of the 115, or is it all of the 115?
The conference is open to all states.
But based on what you've seen so far, I mean, do you have a sense of whether it's going to be a majority or is it a smaller group? I'm just trying to get a sense of those countries that are actually going beyond just making speeches and are going to participate actively in the negotiation and drafting of this convention.
I think it is good to follow the discussions because the delegations have been very specific in contributing to the discussions about the content of the treaty. I think the negotiations are going to be triggered also by the text. Having the first draft is going to generate this negotiation dynamic for the June session. I am sure that all delegations will take place and contribute in a very constructive manner, also with detailed discussions as just the ones that we have had so far. I would like you to just bear in mind that specific number that I mentioned was the number of countries that took part in the high-level segment, but the discussions that we have had up until Thursday have been completely open and very participatory, and many countries that did not take part in the high-level segment are taking the floor to contribute to the discussion in terms of very specific concerns, proposals, and visions they have for the content of the treaty.
With that?
Hi, Ambassador. With Franco with NHK. I wanted to ask, there seems to be some different views on a few issues. One of them is if including verification mechanisms. So do you see these being included eventually in the draft that will be presented? And also, how comprehensive do you envision the instrument to be?
Thank you for your question. I think, as I mentioned, this week has been scheduled in such a way that the countries can have in-depth discussions and reflections about the content. From there, the chair will need to take all these inputs and generate already a draft text for the actual negotiations that will start in June. Therefore, all the perspectives that we have heard so far need to be negotiated when we reconvene in June. We already know what the different approaches are. We already know what the concepts are, the ones that are already generating common ground, and those that are not. But I will not, at this point, I cannot anticipate the final result of this process because it has to. I mean, the negotiation is yet to start in the month of June, and after Saturday, we will start a very critical phase, which is the drafting of the text, and I cannot anticipate then on the substance of what can be included or at the end what can be negotiated by the state parties.
Howard? Press the button.
There, got it. Sorry about that. Yes, Howard LaFranchi with the Christian Science Monitor. So, Ambassador, are you saying that no nuclear weapon states currently are participating in the conference or the negotiations? And is there any interface with the NPT or any connection to the NPT or building off of the NPT? And then finally, if there are no nuclear weapon states, is this basically sort of an exercise in moral force? I mean, is it just you speak of a legally binding document, but is the effort really aimed at just kind of putting this issue of nuclear disarmament out on the international agenda?
Yes, one of the issues that I mentioned in the briefing is that states have very strongly expressed their views that this treaty is part of the overall architecture for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, including, of course, the non-proliferation treaty and its 3 pillars. And there is a good discussion about how this instrument and this exercise will actually try to implement Article 6 of the NPT. But also reference has been made to the other components of the architecture, such as the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, to cite an example. Yes, so there is reference in the exercise. The countries have already mentioned that the exercise for the ban treaty would be to complement and to strengthen the already existing architecture. In this case, there will be, of course, a lot of discussions in the coming weeks and months about the best way to achieve that. In terms of the phase and of the expectation of the result of this exercise, I would have to emphasize that basically everything we do in life is an exercise of hope. And in this matter, we will continue expecting that, as was the case with the other weapons of mass destruction, the existence of a prohibition, of a legal prohibition, will have an effect on the progressive in the next phase for the elimination or the disarmament, in this case of the nuclear weapons in the world. But at the same time, I think this process is also a political expression of the will of the countries, not only of those who voted in favor of the resolution, but also of those who are strongly and very actively participating in the process, to call for a complete elimination of nuclear weapons and to move beyond the 20th century security thinking and doctrine, to move to a 21st century security environment. Of course, we are seeing increasing tensions in the world, but from the view of those countries who are participating, the response to that is to work towards precisely eliminating that source of threat, which is not only a threat for the countries, but only for the survival of the humankind. So this is what the contribution is in this moment, is to complement the architecture, to complement the legal and normative basis, but also to complement the political, the expression of the political will of the majority of states and the majority of the peoples of the world to actually move towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. And let me just remind that this process has been propelled by the evidence-based constatation of the humanitarian impact and environmental impact of any use of nuclear weapons, and at the same time of the increasing frustration with the stalemate of the multilateral disarmament machinery. These two elements lie at the basis of this process, and the countries that are participating are expressing a very strong will that we are ready to move on and to tell the world and the peoples of the world that we are ready to move on to take necessary steps. And one of the necessary steps is to move on to a legally binding instrument that can prohibit the nuclear weapons.
On the question of participation of nuclear weapon states, none are participating?
So far, none are participating.
Yes, in the back. Yes.
Thank you for the briefing. Shiho Matsuka from Nippon Television, a Japanese news broadcaster. I just have a couple questions. You said a delegation will be working on the text before June. Is there any time frame when this will be made to public, and are there any specific countries that will be working on this draft mainly? And also, are you planning to have another press conference after the meeting tomorrow? Thank you.
There is no draft text. The drafting exercise will start after tomorrow, Saturday, by the chair and the chair's team. Of course, I will hold consultations, but there is no specific number of delegations that will be engaged in actually drafting. We will, of course, have all delegations engaged when the time comes for the negotiation process that will start in June. I will not give yet any timetable because yet we need to share those views with the conference tomorrow, in which we will discuss the institutional arrangements of the treaty, which is a topic that still needs to be discussed, and the way forward for the intersessional session and for the June session.
Mr. Sato.
Thank you, Mr. Haq, and thank you, Madam President. My name is Sato from NHK. I'm afraid you may refrain from commenting on specific countries' attitude, but as a Japanese media, I want to ask you the Japanese attitude on these negotiations. Japan already decided to not attend this negotiation because of that it is not constructive, and the nuclear disarmament should be step by step, including the nuclear holders. So, how do you think the Japan as Japan's role in this negotiation, and also that how do you think what's your expectation to Japanese government to cooperate or to the active role in the nuclear disarmament? And one more question is about, as you mentioned, the 115 countries. Does that mean the credential from the 115 countries you've already got? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I will not make reference to specific cases, but I can tell you that we hope that the engagement by all states can also be an invitation for those who are witnessing the process to hear about the good faith in which negotiations and in which delegations are engaged in the negotiations. Of course, the process is completely open and transparent. Is being broadcasted live. So this is not a closed process. It is an open process, and will remain to be open for all participating, for all those countries that are not participating and that might join in the future.
Yes, in the front.
Mario Villar, la Agencia EFE. I just wanted to follow up on the draft issue. Will it be made public before the next session? And do you expect to model it after any other existing treaty, let's say chemical weapons or landmines?
Thank you. At this moment, I will not make specific reference about the content or the model of the text, as it is still very soon. But you can be sure that once the text is out, it's going to be very noticeable. But we will first distribute it to the delegations before making it, public to the media. We need to make sure that all delegations receive it and have an opportunity to read it and to review it. But it will for sure be public when the meeting starts in June.
You had a question? Yes.
Thank you. Alexandra Makino from the Tokyo Shimbun. Can you provide any kind of color as to what would be sort of the criteria that you would consider for including a certain aspect into the draft? I mean, how there have been all these ideas, how do you start that process, and how do you decide, with your team, what to put in the draft? And then just to follow up the question on the 115, is that the credentials that you have received, or people that you've seen in the room? And then maybe a clarification, Japan did speak on Monday. Do you consider them to have participated in this conference so far? Thank you.
Yes, 115 countries have been participating in the room, and a quite significant number of countries have been engaged in the discussions. We will receive the final report of the Credentials Committee tomorrow for the overall number of credentials that we have received so far. But usually this remains open for several weeks. So some delegations might participate in the credentials, might follow in the weeks to come.
Yes.
About the text that is not the draft before June, but are you going to be proposing or submitting any kind of text about the conference that's happening in this March, tomorrow, after it ends?
I am not very sure that I understand your question in terms of, are you referring to a press release or a document that, or a briefing?
Are you asking whether a text of
how the conference went this time before June?
A summary of some sort.
Yes, a summary you will. Yes, I will release a summary and a press release for you to, and for to make public. Absolutely. Once we finish with the proceedings of the conference tomorrow.
Thanks very much, and once again, thank you, Ambassador Whyte Gómez.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.